Hi, I'm Cameron Laram. I'm a Senior Program Manager in the Operating Systems Group here at Microsoft. And today we'll be talking about cross-platform localization with the Multilingual App Toolkit. So the Multilingual App Toolkit has been available since Windows 8 timeframe, but recently we've extended it to support the Visual Studio plus the Xamarin project support. So if you have Xamarin projects, iOS, Android, or the new Xamarin's Form, we will just work with that environment inside Visual Studio plus Xamarin. What the toolkit provides for you as a developer is easy access to many, many markets. For example, if you want to get into any market like Germany, Spain, China, you need to do localization and globalization. That can be a real pain. So what we do is we allow you to focus on your features of your app rather than your languages. So you just program in your source language. I'll be using English as my example, but it can be any source language you want. That will allow you with the toolkit to migrate easily into other languages. We provide a seamless workflow. Since you're inside Visual Studio with your Xamarin project, it just works as if it was a Visual Studio Windows project. So that if you're familiar with one, the workflow works across the board regardless of your target platform. We give you instant access to translation services. For example, Microsoft Translator is a pay-for-service. With the toolkit, we give you access to that service without charge. We also hook you up with Microsoft's professionally translated strings from our products, such as Microsoft Office, Microsoft Windows, etc. And we enable both friends and family and community level support. So if you want to go higher than a recycle or machine translation quality, that's very easy to do with your friends, family, or professional translation houses. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. What I have is I have 3 demos we're going to run today. And they're all from the Xamarin GitHub site, so these are all readily available to download. And I've downloaded them. I've had to do a little bit of tuning for localization, but Craig Dunn has some great videos on how to localize Xamarin forms, which is the example we're going to use here. And so I'm not going to go deep into that. I'm going to show how the toolkit works if your application is localizable. So let's jump right into Visual Studio. So here we have Visual Studio 2013 with a Xamarin project loaded. This is the tab page demo from Xamarin, written by Charles Petzold. He actually demonstrated it at the Xamarin 2014 event. So I've taken the program and I've actually modified it to be localizable because it was hard-coded strings, which is usually how programs are written. I would recommend making them localizable even if you're targeting English. But I'm not going to get into how I made that localization. I basically communicated with Craig Dunn, and he's the localization guy at Xamarin. He does a lot of talks and demos on it. If you look him up on code on GitHub, you'll find his to-do localization app, and that's a great way to learn how he does localization inside the forms. What's key to know, though, is in the application, we have our resources in our resx file. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this, and we're going to see how this works on an iOS machine. I've got the the iOS emulator set up right now to be German, but the program doesn't have any German strings in it. So we're going to see what it looks like in German. And sorry for the really big emulator today. My screen resolution for projecting has thrown me off a touch. So, but I'll just scroll through. So here's his app. It's a chimpanzee app. It shows just some basic text, some data, but it gives us pages, so we can have different types of monkeys that are being shown. Okay, so the key part about this one here is we are in. Let's see if we're in French. So let's go ahead. You see that we're not in English, but we're still showing an English app because we haven't localized it. So let's come over and let's check our languages. So we're going to go through and we're going to make sure we're doing, we're in French. We're going to do German today. And yes, I do want German. So we're going to restart the emulator. Yes, please do. All right. So now we have our emulator set up in German. We had it in French, still only showed English because that's all we had. So the toolkit is a simple download from the Microsoft's Visual Studio galleries. And I have pre-installed it here already. So you can see that we have the Multilingual App Toolkit version 2.0 technical preview. We've been out since October of 2012. But this is the version that gives you support for Xamarin projects. There is a 3.1 out available that only supports Windows, and we changed the architecture, so this is definitely the one you want to go with regardless of your environment. So that's pre-installed already. Once that's installed, we just go ahead and on the Tools menu, with our project selected, we say Enable the selected project. So I'm going to go ahead and enable the tab Demo. The portable class library holds all the resources for all 3 platforms, so I'm just going to modify that one. I'm going to enable that one. Enabling the other 2 in this example wouldn't have any value, or the other 3 wouldn't have any value because they don't hold resources. So now that we've enabled that, that just sets the project up so that we have the ability to manage the project and enable the workflow. So what you'll notice now is when you right-click, we have the Multilingual App Toolkit menu available on our solution, and we can add languages. So let's go ahead and add German. And I'm actually just going to do German, the language, not the region. The iOS really does the region, does the language, not so much the region. So this is the best way to do it for that. And you'll see that we have a couple of providers here. So this is how we give you translation services. The first one is the Microsoft Language Portal Provider. That is all of Microsoft's professionally translated strings, Office, Windows, Exchange, etc. And those will come to you for free and it will match them up. We also have the Microsoft Translator Service. And the Translator Service is our MT translations, and it will give you a match so that you can see what your software looks like. It does a pretty good job. Again, with any type of recycling or MT, you always want to validate, but for most developers, they're able just to ship with this, and then you can always easily adjust, and I'll show you that too in a little bit. So we're going to add German, and what you'll notice is in our project that the Multilingual Resources folder appears, and there is this file in here called TADDemo DE for German, and then XLF. And that XLF file is a localization industry file format. It stands for XLIF, and it has a metadata-rich environment in which enables our workflow. So just to show the demo, I'm going to go ahead and right-click this, and I'm going to do Generate Machine Translations. And what this does is it goes off to those 2 providers I showed on the previous screen, asks them to translate each string independently to give the best result back. And you can see here that it gave us 7 resources back that we asked for translations on. It's a very limited number of text in the application, so this sounds about right. Now, if we build this really quick, what we'll see is we'll see that we have our German.resx file here, which was not there before. That's managed by the Toolkit. You want to leave that one alone because we make sure the resources are synchronized between your source language and all the target languages. If you had 50 target languages, we would make sure all 50 are current. And I'll open this up and show you that it has been translated into those. So here's our translations. Let's go ahead and run this. We'll come back over here and hopefully our application starts right back up. You can see that we're in German on our emulator. And here's our translations. So it was that easy to translate this application, once it was localizable, into German. Now, when you talk about different markets, being able to go into at least the top 10 markets is really critical. And with the Toolkit, we make it extremely easy for you to do it, even if you're doing cross-platform with Xamarin, Windows, and iOS. So you have your choice of your targets, and this is their forms, and pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and maybe want to change one of these words, right? So we're looking at this and going, I'm not sure I want these translations. So let's kick back over to the project, and we'll show you how you take those recycled and MT translations and turn them into something a little better for the ones or twos that you don't like. So you can just double click on the XLIF file, and this launches an external editor. And we've made it an external editor to enable your friends and family scenarios. So an XLIF file is supported by pretty much any translation house out there. They all know how to handle XLIF because it is an industry standard. We also provide an editor that supports that standard so that if you have friends, family, community translators, they're able to process the file and give it back to you. And I'll show how you do that in just a minute. So here's our German file. And you see we have chimpanzee here. I'm going to go ahead and get a suggestion for this. So you can see that only the Microsoft translator has results. That's because Microsoft apparently hasn't translated chimpanzee. You'd think we would have, but apparently we didn't need to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and change chimpanzee to the second option. I like that one a little better. And I'm going to go ahead and see what else we got here. I'm going to look at family. And for family, I want to actually use the one with, let's go with the one with the colon looks pretty good. Let's pick this one, just because it's from the language portal. Now I'm going to apply the suggestion, but I want to put a colon on the end of it, so I can just go in. And post-edit this afterwards. So let me save this, and I'm going to go ahead and rebuild and run this, and we should see that our strings have changed. Yes, I have my editor open, so it wants to refresh that, and you can see we have different strings already. Go ahead and run this. And I'm not going to show it today, but this tabbed app, it works exactly the same for iOS, for Android, and for Windows Phone. And they look like they should on a Windows phone. Like, for example, on the iOS app here, the tabs are at the bottom. On an Android, they'd be at the top. And for a Windows phone, it would be the standard pivot table that you see where you can scroll between the different columns. So you can see I left the colon off, apparently, and we did change a few other strings, but we have our translations just working within our project. So it really is that easy. You know, I like to joke that you give me 10 clicks, I'll give you 10 languages. And it's really true. You can get straight into multiple markets with translation quality of your choosing, that easy. All right? So let's go ahead and shut this down and say, you know what, I'm still not convinced that I want to use those exact words. So what I can do is I can open up this project again and simply right-click it and go to Export Translations. Now this is where I'm going to send it to friends and family. Before we had the Toolkit, I actually did a program that I translated into Russian, and I had my Russian friend translate it for me. And while she did really good work, it was really painful because I had to copy and paste every string. I had to synchronize. I missed a string because when I actually added a new resource in Russian and forgot to put it in English, I had a gap in my UI. I almost shipped that way. With the Toolkit, you only do your source language and you let the translation manage your targets, so you won't have those type of problems. It will always synchronize it for you. So you see here what we have is I'm going to send it to a mail recipient because I want to send it to my friend in Russia. And I'm going to send it out in the XLIF format because that's the strongest format given industry standard. I can also do comma delimited. Some translation houses may prefer that, but it gives you the flexibility if they want to open it in Excel and do the translations. So we give you that option too. And it lists the files that you're going to export. If I had 50 files, I could select all of them and send them all at once. Be a little bit of a burden for the person getting it, but maybe you're sending it to a vendor. So I'm going to click OK. And this is going to go ahead and bring up a new email in my client. And it just puts a real simple email that you can then modify. You send who you're going to send it to. It's a translation request. There's the attached file. And it gives them the information as to where they can download the editor. So for example, if I go to this site here, this will bring up the Visual Studio Gallery site where we have the technical preview loaded. And if I download on this, a lot of people are concerned that, oh, I don't have Visual Studio. Well, it's an MSI, so it'll only install the components that are relative to the machine. So if I just have a Windows 7 box without Visual Studio because I'm a translator, it will install the editor and the translation services. So they still get the free Microsoft Translator and recycled strings in their projects, so they can do exactly what I do as a developer if I were to do my own translations using the editor. It's about 2.2 megabyte download, so it's very quick, very efficient. It's a really quick, easy way to engage with your friends and family. In fact, I know several developers that just tweet, hey, I know a few languages. I can do these other languages. If you can do my French and Spanish, I can do your German and Russian. And they never have a problem getting translations, and they build a community of developers for support as well. So that's a really great way to do community-level translations with it. So I'm going to go ahead and close this off, because I'm really not going to send it to someone today. And then we're going to pretend that they've actually went off and translated it, and they sent back the results. So I'm going to add a new language to show how that works. So let's go ahead and again, I'm just adding a language because, hey, it's time to add French, right? So let's go do French. So I'm going to add French. I'm going to do the locale-specific one this time. And one of the things you'll notice is there's a new provider here when I do the locale-specific. This is a demo provider that we've written by Taos. It's for Taos data. They're more of a lookup rather than a translation service. But because it knows that my app from English to French is available for it, it does display that as an available provider, which is an interesting point. If you have your own database of translations, or you want to use Google Translator, which, feel free, you can pay for their service when you get ours for free, you now have the ability to do 8 APIs and implement it yourself. And that's up on our Codeplex site. So that's very easy to do. So now I have my French, and I'm going to go ahead and do the reverse of what I've just done. I'm going to import this, and I can say import translations. Now, I didn't pre-machine translate these because I just sent it to a friend. They could translate it using the editor we talked about earlier, but I just want to bring in the work that they've done. So I'm going to paste in where I know this is at, and I'm going to pick the file that they've sent me. Now, we figure out what the files are. The naming convention helps, but we figure that out. Resource enabling. If we want to recycle, what this will do is it will loosen some of the criteria, so it doesn't have to be the exact resource ID. It just has to be the same source string and the same language pairs. This makes it so that you can import translations and recycle the contents from other projects that you may have written. For example, you'll never have to translate the cancel button again into French because you probably have it in another app, and you can import that. It will take what it can match and it will ignore what it can't. So it's just a great way to go. So I'm going to import these and scroll down my list, and we'll see that we have 7 resources that have been imported. So these are imported that are now in French. And if I open up this file, we'll see that these are translations available to us for French. And again, in our editor, my friend has translated it, they've marked them as translated, and they sent it back to me. And of course, here's our Taos provider showing because it's now the first provider. All right, so that's how easy it is. So you saw that for me to do German, I simply just said enable, add German, machine translate, run. For me to do French, which I wanted to have a friend do the translations for me, I simply just add French, export, import, and run. And now I'll have French if I set my emulator up. So that's the core of the localization workflow that we give you for free with the Multilingual App Toolkit. Again, all the translation services that we provide are free. You can extend to your own set, and now you can enter many, many markets with little work. Again, focusing on your application's functionality and letting us target the languages. So that's the Xamarin Forms. We're going to go ahead and switch over, and we're going to look at the iOS version of this. Xamarin also supports iOS projects that use iOS-based UI, but common portable class library code behind. This is great for if you're writing a service to connect to Azure, doing anything that is common, and there's about 60% reuse is what they advertise for that, and I found that to be fairly true. Again, with Forms, I got more like 95% because it was common XAML, but you also want to be able to take your existing iOS apps, take your UI, copy and paste them into the XAML environment, and do it in C#. So let's go ahead and jump over and do one of those. So I'm going to come back to my project, and I'm going to open up a new one. So we have a Touch iOS. Again, as I was saying, I'm pulling all these from the GitHub environment. Xamarin, if you go to Xamarin Evolve 2014, they have a bunch of examples on how to do Xamarin and the different technologies. So I've just pulled this one down. I needed to localize it, so I made it localizable. And the way you make an iOS app localizable, is a brief overview of it, is you create your country or your language code .lproj, and then put a strings file in. I call mine localizable.strings. So here are all the gestures from, this is a gesture app that are in there. I've made these localizable. I wrote a quick little extension just to hook those up, so that way when we look at the code just has, I just cheated, and I just say the original hard-coded string that they've put in, dot the extension, so it will pull it up. With iOS, if it doesn't find the resource, it gives you back whatever string you asked for. So they recommend that you use the string you'd want to be displayed. That way your fallback is always something that's readable instead of a resource ID that you may not want to show. Okay, enough about the little primer on Android or iOS localization. So again, as you saw before, all we need to do is enable the toolkit, add your languages, and our emulator's in German still, so I'm going to go ahead and do German again. Again, I've got my 2 translation providers. Created the DEL proj, created the multilingual resources, same as before. We do the XLIF, we manage your target resources for you. And I just generate those machine translations. And now I'm getting my iOS app from the Xamarin examples into German, just with a few clicks. So let's go ahead and run this. Now we're going to run it in German. Here's our German strings. So you see, it was that easy. I literally just said, give me these languages, give me some machine translation, and now I have an iOS app for the German market. I may want to tune some of my string lengths. German can be pretty big. Again, we want to make sure we size it, but now I have my different things. Now here's one of those things you really want to watch for. The drag-me, these are images with hard-coded text. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's you can see how that's a problem. But I do have a fully localized German app for iOS. All right, let's go ahead and do the same thing for Android. So some of you are probably saying, well, that's really cool, but I use Xamarin Studio on my Mac for development a lot. I do use Visual Studio as well. I bounce back and forth between the two. But how do I take advantage of that? Well, let me show you here. With the Visual Studio and Xamarin support, we give you the workflow, but we don't break you when you move back to the Xamarin environment. So I'm going to go ahead and take this application here, and we're just going to jump right into it. I'm going to pretend like I'm not doing a video and just localizing it myself. So I've enabled it. I'm going to go ahead and add my languages. Let's actually add both German and French this time, because why not? So there's my French, there's my German. Click here, and you'll see that the project is going to be expanded off to have, again, the multilingual resources folder with our XLIF files in it, and it's going to create the target files for our resources that have our values.language code. That's the way the Android works, and so we just map that image too. So again, here's our multilingual resources. Here's our 2 XLIF files. Probably getting pretty familiar with seeing this pattern by now, which is the point. Windows, iOS, Android. It's all the same workflow for you. And down here, we generate your strings files for your particular locales. And that's the secret as to why we work in your environments. So I'm going to go ahead and just right-click here, and I'm going to translate both of these at the same time. So I'm going to generate my machine translations. And you see that since we selected 2, we get a dialog that shows 2 of them being processed at the same time. I'm going to do a build. I want to do my build in Visual Studio, because Visual Studio in the build is where we move it from our XLIF file to the native target resource file. So if you don't build, those files will actually be empty, and you'll be going, well, I thought this was supposed to work for me. Yeah, but you got to make sure you do the last step. So we're doing a quick build, and that's going to synchronize our files so that our language files will be set up. And while that's building, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start up Xamarin Studio and kill off the Mac OS. Okay, so we do have a successful build, and I'm going to pull up my French string files, and this is a very limited string resource file. It's just a quick demo for a click button. But you can see that we have our native resources for Android in French, and same for German. Okay, so if I come over to Android Studio and I open up the layout project. Okay, so you see here that we've loaded the project up in Xamarin Studio. This is the layout, again, from the Xamarin GitHub site for their demos. And as we saw, we added these in Visual Studio, and we have the languages populated, and we have our French language here. So I've got the emulator up and running. So we're going to go ahead and just run this in Xamarin Studio to ensure that we don't have any build breaks and that it actually does create our French project. So it's a pretty simple program. It's just a button click, and here's French. If I were to switch my emulator to German, since we did include German with the initial language selection, I would also have German. So now I have a very quick demo app from Xamarin's website that shows English, French, and German with just a few clicks inside of Visual Studio, but then transports over to Xamarin Studio so that you continue to use Xamarin Studio if that's your IDE of choice, because there are pros and cons to both. And so now that's a very nice partnership, a very nice mixture of what we're able to do. So again, a quick recap is that we have the ability to show you how to do Xamarin Forms, how to do Xamarin iOS native UI apps, and how to do Xamarin Android native UI apps with the Toolkit, again, providing all the translation services for free, and you can extend those to yourself. All right, so let's go back to our slides. And we did our local layout demo. So some of the questions that I'm constantly asked whenever I talk about the toolkit or just globalization and generalization in general is, or localization and globalization in general, is what are the things I need to worry about? And truthfully, it's a pretty small list. I mean, you can get really deep and, like Microsoft has intense processes that we do for our localization and globalization process. But really, if you just do the top few, you solve most of your problems. So make sure that you're market aware, right? You want to make sure that you don't use custom calendar controls. Not every country starts on Sunday, not every day for the first day of the week, not every country uses a Gregorian calendar. So you want to make sure the calendar controls are location aware. So you want your French calendars, I believe they start on Monday. You want your calendars to be correct, right? You want them to know the type of calendar that is going to be displayed. If you spend all of your time coding that when the system can give it to you for free, you're not making features that make your application stand out in the marketplace. So definitely focus on using the APIs that are there. Classic example is, I don't know how many times in code I've seen and used to do myself, is string format 0, 1, 2, month, day, year, right? Definitely avoid that. That barely works in the US. Doesn't even do military time for US military. So you want to stay away from that. Start building your application globalization by default. I've worked with several individuals and I've asked them, so what was it like to use the toolkit for the first time? And they said, well, actually, it was pretty easy. It just took us 2 weeks to make the software available to be able to handle localization because we didn't build it in to start. So we had to take the entire dev team and make them focused on nothing but doing localization injection. If you do globalization and localization up front, it becomes a habit, just like writing good code becomes a habit. And now, if you want to add a language, it really is a matter of targeting the markets you want. And now you can get into many markets, expand your global reach, and be able to service more customers with very little effort, especially if you're using the toolkit. Your design layouts. Make sure that when you do a design layout, that you're not cramming everything together, right? Especially in the mobile environment. If you have an iPhone to an iPad, right, an Android phone to an Android tablet, a Windows phone, all the way up through Windows Desktop now with UAP, you want to make sure your controls are aligned so that they flow naturally with the layout of the particular form factor. If you push them together thinking English only, it's not going to look good in Russian or German, which are some key markets. Localization best practices. These are pretty straightforward. Put all of your translatable strings or localizable strings into a resource file. You don't want to put them in hard-coded because then you have to go back and fix it. And you'd rather ship than fix, right? So that's a great way just to make a practice of doing that. For iOS, it is language code.lproj, and for Android, it is values underscore language code underscore R region. Again, the toolkit, Multilingual toolkit, will manage that for you, so you don't have to worry about it. Just make your source language the one you want, and we'll go to the rest. If you start with German, we'll translate you to English. So feel free to go from one language to any other language that you want, and we'll support you there. Again, we talked about the layout of the UI. 40% growth is what you're going to see in a lot of languages. You saw on some of the earlier demos how when I did it to German, it barely fit on the iOS screen because the translation was correct for that string, but it's a more verbose language as far as the number of space it takes. So you'd want to be able to either work with your translator or make sure your UI is going to work in that space. Do hard code strings that you don't want to localize. Maybe your product name is a name you want to keep standard. You don't want to have it localized. Maybe you do. Make the decision. Don't put it in a resource file if you don't want it localized, because that will just be instructions to a translator or even to our tool that says, oh, please leave this alone. That's just more work. Avoid text and images. You saw in the iOS demo we did. The buttons were actually hard-coded with text in them, so I couldn't localize them. I would actually have to pay myself, take the time, to take the strings out and then overlay in the code, or to have a translator give me a layered file with multiple images, with multiple translations, and that's just cost. So you can avoid cost and time just by overlaying your text on top of an image rather than embedding them in. And then, obviously avoid concatenating strings. Spanish is a classic language where the verb-noun order is switched a lot. If you have hard-coded in your thing string format, bracket 0, bracket 1, the localizer can't fix that. If you put the bracket 0, bracket 1 in your file, you can put a note saying, hey, for Spanish, this 0 means this and this 1 means this, and they will know whether they need to switch it or not. So your application will look better and feel more like the native language, which is your ultimate goal, right? So use your parameterized placeholders rather than hard coding or concatenating. These are some pretty basic practices that a lot of people don't do. If you do these, you're going to discover it becomes natural and your apps just work. Okay, so I have some resources for you. The resources, obviously, we're talking about the Multilingual App Toolkit today. So version 4 is the one you want for the cross-platform support. It's truthfully the one you want for Windows support as well. It's the go-forward model. So here's a link for the quick download on that. We have a blog that we do. So our Matt blog talks about our releases, and we have other information that we post up there. And we have a user voice site, which we listen to intensely. Go to our userverse site and tell us what you like, what you don't like. If you find a bug, let us know. We'll get it fixed. Hopefully. And we'll just continue to work with you on these areas. Our goal is to make you successful in reaching as many markets as your product needs to go into, and we're here to help you with that. Translation resources. You saw that we provided 2 vendors or providers in our system. So we have the Microsoft Translator. That's a pay-for service. But if you want to do it in a website or dynamic translations, it's a really great way to go. They give you, I think it's 2 million translations or 2 million characters, forget how they count words maybe, for free, which is pretty sufficient for most people. But if you need more, you can go into that. And everybody's used Bing Translator, which is another name for it, to translate a website. It works pretty well. And then, of course, all of Microsoft's professionally translated strings are on the language portal site, and there's a link to it. You can get the strings interactively, or you can actually hook up to the same APIs we do. Thank you very much for listening to the session on how to localize for cross-platform using the Multilingual App Toolkit. The Xamarin and Visual Studio environment is a great environment. Add the Multilingual App Toolkit on top of it, and now you have multiple market, multiple platform support at your fingertips. Thank you.